Now, if you are thinking, wait a minute, this was the same reading as last Sunday, clearly Katrina made an error. We've already heard about Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, right? But this was not an error. This is the same reading as last week, and I did indeed choose it again. In part because there's so much in those 7 little verses, and also because this little story illustrates different movements, different aspects of healing really beautifully. Last week, we talked about the beginning of healing, naming what we need, acknowledging our suffering. As Bartimaeus says out loud in this story, "Let me see again." Our healing begins with a deceptively simple act, acknowledging where we are broken. Let me be healed from my grief. Let me be healed from my heartache. Let me find healing in my marriage. Let me find healing for my physical suffering. Whatever it is, our journey begins by speaking the truth of what we need. And then we need to let go. Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, is sitting by the roadside. When Jesus passes by with the disciples and a large crowd, Bartimaeus shouts to him, "Jesus, have mercy on me." Everyone orders him to be quiet. They try to silence him. He's just a nuisance. But Bartimaeus just cries out even louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And so they tell Bartimaeus, "Get up, he's calling you." And what does Bartimaeus do? Throwing off his cloak, he springs up and goes to Jesus. He throws off his cloak. This is such a small detail in the story, and yet it's a huge detail. For a beggar, and really for anyone in the first century, a cloak was a prized possession. For Bartimaeus, his cloak was probably the most valuable and important thing that he had. A first century cloak, or a himation, was like a large wool blanket, usually just a large rectangle of fabric. It was thick and heavy and could serve many different purposes. It was a coat when it was cold. It was a blanket at night. It could be shelter from rain or hot sun. And for those who had to beg to survive, they would lay their cloak out in front of them in order to gather the coins that people passing by might drop onto the himation. As one scholar wrote about Bartimaeus, his cloak was all that he had. And yet, he jumps up and leaves it behind. He abandons it. He leaves it there on the road, which makes no sense if this was his most important possession. And yet, this specific detail is included in the story, that he throws off his cloak. So interesting, right? Why? Why is that detail there? I think it's because Bartimaeus needs to leave something behind in order to heal. He needs to let go of who he was. He needs to surrender. He needs to let go of his past to step into his future. In order to heal, we need to release what was and embrace what will be. Now, this might sound just as obvious as naming what we need, but we do need to let go of things in order to move forward. Think, for example, about our seed pots and your little seedlings that hopefully have grown and hopefully are doing a little better than mine. But imagine if we had taken those seeds and just kept them in our hand, clutching tightly to them, saying, I'm not going to let go of these seeds. I love these seeds and I love them just how they are. If we didn't open our hand and let them go and surrender them into the soil, into the unseen depths of the earth, right? Then new life would never spring forth. We have to release the seeds in order for the life to come. And so with us, Bartimaeus let go of his old life, his cloak, in order to move into his new life. Or as Ram Dass said, healing does not mean going back to the way things were before, but rather allowing what is now to move us closer to God. And that's important and obvious, but we so often forget this truth. Sometimes we think that healing does mean going back to how things were. We want to feel how we used to be. We want to go back to how things were in the past. We want to revert to that old version of ourselves when things were right and we were happy. Because that's what we know, because that's what is familiar. But we all know we can't go back to how things were. All we can do is let go and move forward into what is. Gretchen Ziegenhals from Duke Divinity School writes about this passage and this idea. She says, in order to create something new, we must, like a trapeze artist, first let go of what we are currently clutching. Blind Bartimaeus must let go of his cloak, giving up all that he has before he can embrace the love and healing that Jesus offers. We may need to let go of habits, old stories, a culture, a pattern of behavior, an expectation. Old habits are safe and predictable, and most of us don't want to let go of the trapeze bar unless we have some sense of what we're grabbing next. But when we allow ourselves to let go and experience the in-between, we are open in a way that gives us the perspective we need. Isn't that a beautiful image of being willing to let go of the trapeze bar and be in that in-between time, which is literally in midair? when nothing is holding us up. Sounds pretty risky. But letting go, releasing what we know, is essential for life, and we see it in nature all over the place. Think of leaves being dropped from trees, right? The cells in trees actually release the leaves. If they didn't, the leaves would freeze and the tree would die. Think of hermit crabs. I watched too many videos of hermit crabs yesterday. You know, they have to move out of their old home and be vulnerable for a little while until they move into a new and bigger home that fits them. Snakes shedding their skin, insects shedding their exoskeleton, crabs stepping out of the old shell and building a new, bigger, better shell. It's all letting go of what was known and leaving it behind in order to live and to grow. I want to share a story of a woman named Janine Shepherd. And here is Janine, about 1986. Janine was a world-class cross-country skier, and she was training to be in the Calgary Olympics. She was expected to win Australia's first ever medal at the Winter Games in cross-country skiing. But one day in 1986, she was cycling as part of her training. She was cycling up mountains in Australia, and going up around a curve, she was hit by a truck. She had catastrophic injuries to her back and neck, broke multiple bones. Her whole right side was opened up and filled with parts of the road. Doctors did not expect her to survive. But she did. But she spent 6 months in the hospital on her back and endured multiple surgeries. She was finally released to go home, but was told that she would have no feeling from the waist down and that the damage was permanent and she needed to adjust to her new reality. As you can imagine, this was a devastating life change for Janine, and especially so because her entire identity was being an athlete, was moving her body. That's all she knew and all she did. That's who she was. So what now? Who was she without being able to be an athlete? How could she move forward? She first had to let go of her identity as an athlete. And then she decided that she would become a pilot. So, still in a body cast, she showed up for her first flying lesson, and they had to push her up into the plane along the wing, but she did it. And she kept flying, and she got her pilot's license, and she even learned how to walk again, one of those against all the odds. She actually is walking. She became a flight instructor. She wrote books, and now she's an author who speaks all over the world about healing and resilience and finding a new life. Janine wrote this: I realized that this wasn't just my life, it was life itself. I realized that this wasn't just my pain, it was everybody's pain. And then I knew that I had a choice. I could keep fighting this, or I could let go and accept not only my body, but the circumstances of my life. The philosopher Lao Tzu once said, when you let go of what you are, you become what you might be. I now know that it wasn't until I let go of who I thought I was that I was able to create a completely new life. It wasn't until I let go of the life I thought I should have that I was able to embrace the life that was waiting for me. And although my physical capabilities have changed dramatically, who I am is unchanged. The pilot light inside of me was still lit, just as it is in each and every one of us. So indeed, we let go in order to begin our healing. We cast off those cloaks in order to have the space to receive the offer of new life from Jesus. We surrender to find a new path, because as we know, it is dying that we rise. It is in accepting the little deaths that we discover our resurrections. Amen.